Today, I'm going to rank every single Red Dead Redemption 2 gang in a tier list, starting from the worst gangs going all the way up to the best gangs. 99% of my viewers are unsubscribed, so if you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe as I'll be posting tier lists every single day. In 6th place, we've got the Laramie Gang. They're not really a gang as they're just hired thugs, hired by rich people, but I feel like they're also just not really in the story that much. There's that one part with, I guess all of Epilogue Part 1, where John kind of encounters them, hangs out with them, beats them up, but I feel like they're not really that interesting. They're just hired people. They don't have that same camaraderie as some of these other gangs do, especially like the Lemoine Raiders. At least they have like a certain cause. And I feel like even though they're considered a gang by Red Dead Redemption 2, like in the compendium or whatever, I don't know what you call that, but like for 100% completion, they're not really a gang. And I feel like, I don't know, they're not that interesting. They're just a bunch of hired people. They attack John, and they are a big part in Epilogue Part 1, but I feel like every single gang has a big part in at least one of the chapters. So I feel like they have to be the worst gang here, and they're just not that interesting. There's nothing really going on with them, and I think I'm going to have to put them in F tier because they're not even a real gang. They're just a bunch of hired thugs, so they don't have that same way they became a gang like all these other ones. In 5th place, I've got the Murphy Brood. Again, the Murphy Brood is really interesting as a gang. They're a bunch of incesting, like people that just kill a bunch of other people, but I feel like they don't have that same gang vibe as a lot of these other ones do. They're only in the 6th chapter, and you do take them out of Beaver Hollow, and they're a bunch of really weird people, but they're not really involved in Red Dead Redemption 2 at all, besides that one part. And I just think them and like the Skinner brothers are really similar, and I just think the Murphy Brood is a little bit lamer, even though they are involved in the story. I'd say they're definitely involved in the story, maybe the least out of any game besides the Del Lobos. I just don't think they're that interesting. I don't like people that are incest people, and I don't know. I just feel like they're not that interesting. They're really similar to the Skinner brothers, and while they came before the Skinner brothers, they definitely have less of a role in the story than the Skinner brothers do. I feel like that just takes away a lot from them as a gang, and they're just not that interesting. It's just like the most vile people you could ever pick to be in a gang. That's what the Murphy Brood is. I don't know. I just don't like them that much, and I feel like they're not using the story enough to warrant a higher place, but I'm going to put them in C tier because at least they're kind of interesting. In 4th place, I've got the Skinner brothers. They're just a little bit above the Murphy Brood because even though they are very similar to the Murphy Brood, there is at least 2 bounty targets on them, and I think their kind of style of killing people is a little bit more interesting. They also flay. They do some bad things to Uncle, so I think that's kind of funny, and they're also big in the Manzanita Post mission. I don't know, the one where they bring the lumber back to the house. And I think those ones are, I feel like, more interesting than anything the Murphy Brood is in. But again, I feel like it's just a really one-dimensional gang, and there's not really much going on here. They're also, not involved in the story at all until Epilogue Part 2. I don't even know. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think you can even encounter them until this point. So I don't know. I feel like they're just not interesting at all, but at least they're more interesting than the Murphy Brood. There's a little bit more going on. There's a little bit more content to them, and you can kill them a lot more. And just whenever you're going into tall trees, you always see these guys. They will always ambush you, and I feel like that has to put them up a little bit more, even though I still don't like them at all as a gang. I feel like the Skinner brothers are definitely just one of the weirdest gangs, and even though they're kind of just these sadistic people that just hurt other people for fun, it doesn't really put them up any higher, and I'm going to also have to put them in C tier. In 3rd place, I've got the Del Lobo Gang. I feel like they're also just a little bit more interesting than the last 2, but again, you can't see them until going to New Austin, and I don't know. I just feel like they're not as interesting as the top 2. I feel like the top 2 are clearly far and above everyone else, but there are some interesting missions with them, with the noblest of men and women, with Flaco Hernandez. Like, he's part of the Del Lobo Gang, and I think Ramon Cortez, like the shootout with him, is kind of interesting. And I just feel like them taking all over New Austin is really interesting, and I think it kind of works towards the story because New Austin is just kind of terrorized by them, and them taking over like Fort Mercer and all that. I don't know, it works well, but I feel like they really don't do anything special, and the Del Lobo Gang they're just all introduced so late. Like, the last 4 gangs are all introduced basically at the end of the game, and I feel like the top 2 are clearly far and away above better than any of the other ones. I just think the Lobo Gang doesn't have that much interesting going on with them. While they do have some beef with the Tumbleweed guy, I think it has to put them a little bit above the Skinner brothers and the Murphy Brood, just because they're such a big gang and they did so much with their like gang ability. And I feel like I wish that could be happening for the Vanderlyn Gang, but I don't really think they do anything interesting enough to warrant them being any higher than C tier, so I'm going to have to put them in C tier. In second place, I've got the Lemoine Raiders. The Lemoine Raiders are really interesting. They have kind of their own Confederate style. I mean, they're really just a bunch of bad people that were like slavers and former Confederates, and I just think that's, I don't know, they have a really interesting backstory. I always shoot them whenever I see them because I just hate the Lemoine Raiders. They're just a bunch of terrible people, but I still think they're one of the most interesting gangs. They work directly with the Braithwaites, and I think a lot of the bounties with them work well. I mean, you can capture, I think, their leader, and he's just not with them at all. I don't think they like him. You can also see when you actually talk to them or like you go up on their camp and listen to them, you can actually see that the younger people are like super devout in their reactionary views, and the older people are a lot less about that. But I don't know. I really just like how they are used throughout the game, and I feel like they're a big part of the game with like Shady Belle, and you spend a lot of time in Lemoine just because you're at Shady Belle and you're at Clemens Point, and I think they just take up a lot of points there. And when you clear out Shady Belle both times, it's like really interesting to see, like, you know, to kill all these Lemoine people, and it's just they're really racist, and I don't know, I feel like it just works super well how well they're integrated into the story, and I think a lot of their lore works really well as well. I don't know. I really like the Lemoine Raiders. I love how they're used in the story of the game, but I don't really think they can go any higher than A tier here. I still think they're a really solid gang, but I think everyone knows what has to be number one. In first place, of course, it's the O'Driscoll Gang. They're here throughout the entire game. First, they're killing Sadie Adler's husband, and they're, you know, doing some bad things to her, and then you get to attack them at their, I don't know what base it is, but you get to attack them at their base in Coulter, and then you get to meet Kieran, who came from the O'Driscolls. The O'Driscolls are also just everywhere. There's so many of them. They're in the Valentine Poker Saloon, and I feel like they're just kind of all the way throughout the game. You, of course, do see them a lot more in Chapter 2 because that's kind of when the main stuff is going on with them. But I think it is really interesting. You also get to attack them at 6 Point Cabin, which is really interesting with Kieran. And I feel like Colm O'Driscoll is always this big, bad antagonist guy that's hanging over you for the whole story. And I don't know, I really like his inclusion as a character because he seems bad he seems bad from Dutch's words, but then you see Dutch isn't really that reliable of a narrator and kind of just says everything to get his morals right. And it really seems like they should have, you know, patched up the beef a little bit earlier, but of course the parlay didn't work. I think also them taking Arthur out, or like taking him out during that parlay, is really interesting, and it really works well for the dynamics. I think they didn't do enough with it where, like, I don't know, it like worked with the parlay, and you go into it and you're like, oh my god, the O'Driscolls and the Vanderlyn Gang's finally going to patch things up, and then doesn't go right that way. But I still think the O'Driscolls have to be the most interesting game in the entire thing. They also attack your Shady Belle after they take Kieran and torture him and cut his head off. So I think that's also really interesting. And then just throughout the game, like, Sadie is always trying to hunt down the O'Driscolls. You eventually get to go against them in Hanging Point Cabin or Hanging Point Ranch. You can see here, Hanging Dog Ranch. And then you also get to see Colm O'Driscoll hang. I feel like that's probably one of the more fun missions of the entire game. You just get to see Colm O'Driscoll hang. And even though he's not someone that I'd really say I really hate as a character, because you can't really see much of what he does to like Arthur and Dutch and all them, but you see he's a really bad guy. And I don't know, it's just perfect working with Sadie because she has such a vicious hatred towards the O'Driscolls. And while I don't like the O'Driscolls either, she really hates them. And I don't know, I hate Colm O'Driscoll, though. I feel like he's really works as an antagonist that's played up by Dutch, even though Dutch is also technically an antagonist throughout the entire game. And really, is Colm O'Driscoll that bad of a guy? I feel like he's just really similar in terms of Dutch, where he just kind of has all these people and uses them to his advantage. I mean, you see he always has like 25 people at least, or like 30 people in his gang, and they're all just random dudes. Anyone who can pick up a gun can join the O'Driscoll gang. And I think that's really interesting, and that's why I have to put them in S tier. They're definitely the best gang in the entire game. I feel like they're just more intertwined with the story than any other gang, and I just think they're the most interesting out of all the gangs because there's the most lore behind them, or the Lemoine Raiders, but at least they're connected with the Vanderlyn gang really well. That concludes my full Red Dead Redemption 2 gangs tier list. Let me know what you would have changed, and if you do want to see more content like this, please like this video and subscribe. I'm going to be coming out with this tier list every single day, and if you do disagree with anything, drop a comment and I'll debate with you in the comments.